Okay, we'll start with this. Well, it seems there was a war of words yesterday on Twitter between Claressa Shields, Raquel Miller, and Lou DiBella. In a tweet that reads, "You're only concerned with what you can get. You haven't boxed a top 10 fighter. Only fight in San Francisco, and you're worried about being a model more than actually boxing. You a whole ass bum. I'll keep saying it. And lastly, you called me out. I answered, and then you went silent. So fuck up, bitch." To which Raquel Miller replied, "My team and I know the truth, and I didn't have to explain it to you or anyone else. We will see. Stop worrying about me and worry about Hammer knocking your teeth straight soon. I don't model, I box, but I could if I wanted. You mad? Last thing, please never call me a roach when you look like one." Now, at some point in this heated war of words between Raquel Miller and Claressa Shields, Lou DiBella intervened, and he had this to say. He said, "I don't know if you're trying to poke at a particular fighter, Claressa, but I've been sitting with fights that have been agreed to that are as good as can be made in women's boxing. Some of the matchups have been written about. Your statement isn't fair. I'm still waiting." To which Shields replied, "It's fair. It's two particular fighters. One being a loudmouth scary cat Miller, and the other yelped my name to the rough top Napoleon. I wanted to fight both of them, but the answer was no. Not really a shot at you, but at them. Women not wanting to fight the best." To which Lou DiBella replied, "Miller was never even offered a fight with you. In fact, this pretty beast has never turned down any fight. And if you are concerned with fair play for women, you'd get another champion or well-known female fighter isn't going to run to fight you for 10% of what you are earning." To which Raquel Miller replied, "Exactly, Lou DiBella. Claressa Shields is not concerned with the elevation of the sport. She's too busy expecting all of us to kiss her ass like our hard work and talent shouldn't be recognized because of her accomplishments, and we should be willing to fight for pennies. Get the fuck out of here." Now, Dimitri Salita decided to chime into this heated debate, and he said, "It's getting better, Lou DiBella, and Claressa Shields is a big reason why. She chose to fight the best from the beginning of her career. Pro debut again, champion Franchon Cruz. For purposes of full transparency, we made significant career-high offers to other champions that said no." To which Lou DiBella replied, "Agree. But you never made an offer to me for Claressa versus Raquel. I did turn down an Alicia fight, believing that it was unfair to my fighter to make that fight for the money available. And Claressa fought two women after Alicia had beat them. Claressa fights the best, but..." To which Raquel Miller added, "Thank you, Lou DiBella. Claressa Shields, no. The only fight we've been offered was a debut fight, 4 rounds, no title, no money. She can keep telling BS lies trying to make people think I'm ducking her, when she and I both know it's only a matter of time before her big mouth is shut and humbled." Now, before I get into my thoughts on this entire situation, you might want a bit of backstory on these two girls. You see, Raquel Miller and Claressa Shields, they're not strangers. They actually came up in the Emmys together. Claressa, Raquel Miller, Michaela Mayer, Franchon Cruz, Tiara Brown, Marlena Esparza, all these girls came up in the Emmys together, so they know each other. And while some of them might actually get along, that's not the case when it comes to Claressa and Raquel. Now, it sounds like what Claressa's trying to say is that's a fight that she wanted, and it's a fight that Raquel was avoiding. But upon further analysis, it seems that what Lou DiBella is saying is, y'all never actually made us an offer for that fight. So you've got to step back. At this point, you've got to step back and look at what's being said. Lou DiBella is saying, you guys never made us an offer for Claressa to fight Raquel. And we already know that out of those two girls, Claressa is not only the reigning champion, but she's also the marquee fighter of the two. More people know Claressa than they know Raquel. So, Claressa's definitely the marquee fighter. In which case, if the marquee fighter really wants a fight with somebody, they want to, there's somebody out there, they want to fight him, then it's on them to make the offer. Because until that fighter that you want to fight positions themselves via the alphabet,
like WBC.
They climb the ranks, they become a mandatory, the powers that be order the fight. Until that happens,
you gotta make it.
The only other way that you can make the fight possible is for you to make it happen. For you to make the offer and set the terms that make the fight. And if they haven't done that yet, then you can't accuse Raquel of ducking you. I.e., if she's not your mandatory and you didn't make her an offer, then how's she ducking you? Second thing, Claressa Shields is currently campaigning as a middleweight, right? Claressa Shields has been around about as long as Raquel Miller has. They both got the same number of fights, it's just that Claressa fought better quality of competition. But the same applies. Neither one of these two girls have been around very long, and they both have practically the same number of fights. But where Raquel debuted and still campaigns as a middleweight. Clarissa Shields just got to that weight class. She ain't been campaigning as a middleweight very long. Did you guys forget that when Clarissa Shields debuted as a professional, she debuted as a super middleweight? She won titles there, she had good fights there, but she debuted as a super middleweight. Only recently did she go down to Raquel Miller's weight class, whereas Raquel Miller's been there all along. So how can you accuse someone of ducking you when you were never in their way? You just got to the middleweight division. Both Clarissa Shields and Raquel Miller debuted as professionals in 2016, but unlike Raquel, Clarissa debuted as a super middleweight, and she didn't officially start campaigning as a middleweight until June of 2018, last year. Whereas Raquel was at middleweight the whole time. So it's hard to accuse someone of ducking you, of trying to circumvent you, of trying to get out of your way or stay out of your way when you were never in their way to begin with. You just got down there. So I'm just not seeing where Clarissa can accuse Raquel of ducking with any kind of validity, because y'all debuted as professionals at the same time but in different weight classes. So you wasn't even in her way. And two, you actually are the marquee fighter. You done fought anywhere from HBO to Showtime to DAZN. So you got the means, the money, the platform, and the backing to create the fight, and yet you never offered it to her. How can she avoid something that's not in her way? How can she avoid a situation that was never made available to her? That don't make a lot of sense. So in that situation, I don't see where Clarissa can accuse Raquel of ducking with any kind of validity. Now, in the case of Alicia Napoleon, it's a little bit more sorted. It's a little different. Currently, Alicia Napoleon is the WBA champion in the super middleweight division, a division that Clarissa no longer campaigns in. But I will say that in her case, she actually was made an offer. And what Lou's saying is they didn't like the money. That's why they passed on it. Essentially, I guess they feel they were being lowballed. Without an exact dollar amount or a percentage, we don't know what they were offered. But I will say that as a champion,
trying to make a name for themselves,
options are limited for Alicia Napoleon in that weight class. The middleweight division is a much more
robust,
hot division, a division that has a bigger talent pool. So if you're at super middleweight, where the talent pool's a bit thin, there aren't that many, there just aren't that many big names in that weight class, and the biggest name of them all makes you an offer, even if it's a low ball, you've got to consider that what other options do you have? What else is out there? What else can you do that's gonna make a dent, that's gonna get you any kind of notoriety? It's an interesting situation because I can see an argument on both sides. If it's true that all Alicia Napoleon was offered was 10% of what Clarissa was gonna be making, I can definitely see why they would pass on that. But at the same time,
who else are you gonna fight?
Clarissa Shields, at that time, was the biggest name in your weight class. There are no other marquee fighters that are equivocal to her. So if you feel that you can beat her, and you feel that you can make a name for yourself in doing so, because I guarantee you, if Alicia Napoleon fought Clarissa Shields and Alicia won, that would make headlines. If they would have made a fight, and she would have beat her, that would have grabbed everybody's attention, because there was really only one fighter in that entire weight class that anybody was paying attention to, and that was Clarissa. So if you want to put yourself in a position to where you can be the A-side in negotiations, you might have to make a sacrifice. You might have to take a loss. And bear in mind that this is not like men's boxing. You know, the super middleweight division is a thin division when it comes to women's boxing. The big names and the talent pool, you know, it's far and few. It's not like in men's boxing where you can look at an offer that you interpret as a low ball and you say, fuck that low ball offer. I respect myself too much. I can fight so-and-so and so-and-so and still make a pretty decent living. In the women's super middleweight division, you actually don't have that option. You can't play it that way because there aren't that many other alternatives. It might be a situation to where you have to back yourself. You make an investment in yourself. You make a sacrifice because you believe that you can beat that fighter. But that only really works if you believe that you can beat that fighter. If you don't, if you look at it as being too risky for such a low reward, then you pass on it. But I'll tell you, you know, now that Clarissa Shields isn't in the super middleweight division, where does that leave Alicia Napoleon and her WBA title? Who are you going to fight now in a fight that is of any value? That's the question. And that's why I look at it as a double-edged sword. That on one end, I can understand that if they only offered you guys 10% and you guys passed on it, then I can understand why you walked away from it. But at the same time, I also see the consequences of that. That you walk away from that fight, where does that leave Alicia? Who's she going to fight now? What fight can she be in that really is of any value? Or at least of equal value to what Shields was offering? Double-edged sword. The bottom line here is this. It's not about assigning blame or vilifying anybody. It's just looking at the situation objectively and giving an informed opinion. And my informed opinion is, I don't see where Raquel could have ducked Clarissa, because that fight was never in front of her, no matter how you slice it. But in the case of Alicia, it is a little different. If somebody told me that she avoided that fight, it'd be a little bit hard to argue against it. In other news, Arum. Pacquiao should face Porter or Garcia. Spence is too much. He was quoted as saying, Manny doesn't really want to fight Crawford, and the question is, should he? It's not like he's a spring chicken. He's a guy in his 40s, and that means something. A guy in his 40s can run the risk of injury, where a guy in his 30s wouldn't run that risk. Cranium is different and everything, so I wouldn't like Manny to fight either Crawford or Spence. Arum told BoxingScene.com. I think that's a bridge too far. I think if you put him in with a Porter, Porter is not an elite welterweight, and Manny can probably handle him and not get hurt. That would be an okay fight. Or Danny Garcia, who doesn't punch very hard. That would be a good fight for Manny. But Crawford or Spence is a bridge too far, truthfully. Despite the weekend hype, a Pacquiao versus Spence contest seems unlikely, with many expecting Pacquiao to face someone like Thurman. You know, while I might not agree with everything that Bob Arum said, you know, because he said Sean Porter's not an elite level welterweight, and I don't agree with that. He also said that Danny Garcia can't punch. I don't agree with that. Very quickly, you know, Sean Porter may not have the stratagem, the technique, the skill set of a Terrence Crawford, for example, or an Errol Spence, for example. He might be lacking in those areas, but he has his own brand of eliticism that you can relegate to his physical prowess, his athleticism. He has elite-level athleticism, so much so that even though he's not the most polished boxer, he can still wear a guy out. Do realize that everybody that beat Sean Porter, he didn't make it easy for him. He didn't. So to say he's not an elite level welterweight, I think that's kind of short-sighted. And to say that Danny Garcia can't punch, let's think about Danny Garcia for a second. Danny Garcia don't have the fastest hands. He don't have the most
physical gifts,
athleticism or mobility. In the physical realm, Danny Garcia is lacking a bit. But to say that he can't punch, that's one area, that's one physicality, one physical component that I think he does have working for him. I think Danny Garcia can punch, and that's why you don't see more guys trying to walk through the front door on him, because when he hits a guy, they can feel it. Danny Garcia is a very well-rounded boxer. Maybe he's not as fleet of foot as some others, or he doesn't have hair-trigger reflexes like some other guys, but to say he can't punch, I think if Danny Garcia couldn't punch, you'd see more guys walking through the front door on him. But what do you see when guys try to walk through that front door? They get hit with that no-look hook, and either they tread cautiously thereafter, or they get knocked the fuck out. Besides the point, we're here to talk about Manny Pacquiao. I do agree with Bob on this, that a Terrence Crawford or Errol Spence fight at this stage in his career, when he's 40-something years old, yeah, that might be asking a lot. You know, Manny Pacquiao's fans won't tell you that. Manny Pacquiao's fans think that this guy can beat everybody no matter how fucking old he is. They'll overlook the arduous tasks, the arduous performance that he had at the hands of Jeff Horn. They'll overlook shit like that. They won't notice that, look, even if you feel Manny won the fight, you have to notice that he's struggling here. You have to notice that this is a guy that maybe years ago he would have easily dispatched. But it's much harder these days. They overlook shit like that. You know, they look at Manny with blinders on. They love him. Understandable. You can be a fan of a fighter, but when you reach that point to where you can't see things for what they are, you are no longer a credible source for information. I look at a Terrence Crawford versus Manny Pacquiao fight as certain disaster for Manny Pacquiao, and I don't hold it against him. Manny Pacquiao gets old how anybody gets old. You're not always going to be able to compete at the same level you did when you were a younger man. And I think something similar is true in the case of Errol Spence. What is it that these two guys possess that could make things hard for Manny at this stage? I'll tell you what it is. It's reflexes and physicality. It's not just technique. It's not just their skill set. It's a physical component. That Manny Pacquiao physically is not the same man that he used to be. And against those two fighters, he would be tasked with trying to keep up with two younger,
fresher,
physically gifted fighters. Even if Errol Spence's overall punching power has come under question, it being that he couldn't even knock down a fucking lightweight, you know, even if that's under question right now, that still doesn't mean that he would be some kind of walk in the park for Manny Pacquiao. Maybe Manny can make the fight competitive in spots. Maybe Manny can hang in there. You know, maybe Manny goes to 12. Because, I mean, like I said, Errol couldn't floor a fucking lightweight, so he's going to floor Manny Pacquiao? I'm not sure. Errol Spence's punching power is under question. But the physical component overall of a fight like that, it could be arduous for Manny. Because if you struggled with Jeff Horn, and Jeff Horn, he doesn't have the technique of an Errol Spence, so understand that. If you struggled with Jeff Horn, there is still a chance that you might struggle with an Errol Spence. More so with a Terrence Crawford. Understand that if Jeff Horn was able to make things difficult for Manny, even if you think Manny won or you think he lost, whatever, you gotta acknowledge that Jeff made things difficult. And how did he do that? He was real physical with Manny because he's a younger guy, because he's bigger, he's fresher, less wear and tear, and he can take Manny's punches. You know, it's not like Manny didn't draw blood, he drew blood. And he was definitely nailing Jeff Horn, but Jeff took the punches well. He was able to endure. Why? Because he's a bigger, younger, fresher fighter. Now you apply that same logic to a Errol Spence that has a lot of the technique that Jeff Horn don't got. Errol Spence is coming off a fight where he threw upwards of 1,000 punches. Upwards of 1,000. So even if you're not relying on concussive power, that maybe Errol isn't the puncher that you thought he was in terms of power, he's still a guy that can go out there, throw a lot of goddamn punches. That in and of itself could be arduous for an older, war-torn fighter who's in the twilight of his career. So even if you got questions about Errol's power, don't think that would be a walk in the park for Manny, because I reiterate, Manny is getting older, whether you want to accept that shit or not. It's not like either of these two guys are equivocal to fighting Adrian Broner, who Manny just fought. You know, it's not like fighting them is like fighting him. He's just going to come in there for a check, shell up, not throw any punches, you know, take punishment. It's not like that. You know, you're talking about going from fighting a guy that doesn't throw any punches to fighting a guy who can throw upwards of 1,000 punches. So yes, it's physically taxing on a man who's a professional fighter in his 40s, who's been through the ringer, who's already been through wars. So yes, that could be physically arduous. The question is, what's more likely to happen? Because we know why Manny Pacquiao is back here. He's back for the big fights, the big money fights, the big pay-per-view fights. And in that way, that narrows down the pool of names that they can put on a pay-per-view with Manny Pacquiao that would actually sell. Because they're not trying to flop. They are trying to drum up enough interest and conjure up enough intrigue that you might want to buy the fight. I don't think that Terrence Crawford is in the running for that fight, because if Manny really wanted that fight, it would have happened when Bob was pushing for it and they were both on the same side of the street. I don't think Crawford is in the running for the fight, but yeah, Errol Spence is a possibility. A lot of people are high on him right now, some more than others, but a lot of people are high on him right now. They're talking about him. So yeah, it's a possibility. Do I think Manny can beat him? I wouldn't bet on that. Even though I have my reservations about Errol Spence's performance, I still don't trust this version of Manny enough to beat a young guy who's in his prime and has momentum and is hot right now. Sounds a lot like a changing of the guard fight.